You won't believe what's going on behind bars in America. From bizarre prison rules to shocking statistics, the American prison system is full of unbelievable truths that will make you question everything you thought you knew. Stick around for the most jaw-dropping facts about prisons in the USA. And trust me, some of these will leave you speechless. 1. The United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world. With nearly 2 million people behind bars, that's about 20% of the world's prison population, despite the US having only 4% of the global population. Think about that. This is a staggering statistic. 2. Over 40% of federal inmates are locked up for drug-related offenses. These include low-level, non-violent crimes like possession or small-scale distribution. Even worse, many are serving decades-long sentences due to outdated war on drugs policies. Some are still in prison for marijuana, a substance now legal in several states. 3. Prison labor in the U.S. often pays as little as 12 cents an hour. Inmates are used for various jobs, including making furniture, processing license plates, and even fighting wildfires in some states. Despite acquiring valuable skills, they are often unable to use them after release due to their criminal records, creating a cycle of poverty and recidivism. 4. Private prisons turn incarceration into a billion-dollar business. These for-profit facilities prioritize their bottom line over rehabilitation. For example, some contracts even include occupancy guarantees, requiring states to keep prisons 90% full or pay fines to the companies. Where is the justice in this? 5. Over 80,000 people are held in solitary confinement every day. Prisoners in solitary spend up to 23 hours a day in tiny cells, often with no windows. Studies show it causes severe mental health issues, including depression and psychosis. One man in Louisiana spent 43 years in solitary, a truly horrifying thought. 6. Juveniles can be sentenced to life without parole. As of 2021, around 1,500 people are serving life sentences without the possibility of parole for crimes committed as minors. Many of them have no chance of rehabilitation or release. Is that the kind of justice we want for kids? 7. The U.S. spends more on prisons than education. For example, New York spends over $60,000 per year per inmate, but only $25,000 per college student. Think about what that says about priorities. Are we investing in people or punishment? 8. Prison food is often inedible. Budgets for inmate meals can be as low as 50 cents per day in some states. Reports of spoiled meat, moldy bread, and even maggots in the food aren't uncommon. Could you eat that? 9. Overcrowding forces inmates to live in unsafe and degrading conditions. In California, for instance, prisons designed for 100,000 inmates have housed over 150,000 at times. Inmates sleep in hallways, on floors, or even in bathrooms. It's no wonder violence and disease run rampant. 10. Former inmates face massive hurdles after release. About 60% are unemployed a year after getting out, thanks to criminal background checks. Without a job or stable housing, many end up back in prison. How can anyone rebuild their life under these conditions? 11. Pregnant inmates in some states are still shackled during childbirth. Imagine being in labor, unable to move because of chains on your wrists and ankles. Despite calls for reform, this inhumane practice continues in several states. How is this still happening in the 21st century? 12. Private companies make millions from prison phone calls. Families of inmates are charged outrageous rates, sometimes $1 per minute, just to stay in touch. In some cases, a 15-minute call costs as much as $15. This is exploitation, plain and simple. 13. The U.S. still has debtors' prisons in disguise. Although outlawed federally in 1833, some states jail people for unpaid court fees or fines. For example, in Alabama, people have been jailed for owing as little as $50. Think about that, a jail sentence because you're too poor to pay a bill. 14. Prison riots are often sparked by unbearable living conditions. In 2018, South Carolina saw one of the deadliest prison riots in decades, leaving 7 inmates dead. Overcrowding, lack of medical care, and rampant gang violence were major factors. Imagine living in a place where survival feels like a daily battle. 15. Some states still allow forced sterilization of inmates. As recently as 2014, women in California prisons were sterilized without proper consent. This horrifying practice echoes dark chapters of history. How is it still happening? 16. Inmates can be denied basic needs like clean clothes. In some prisons, they are forced to wear the same clothes for weeks or even months without the chance to wash them, leading to poor hygiene and the spread of diseases. Such treatment is a clear violation of basic human dignity. 17. In some U.S. prisons, despite corporal punishment being banned, there have been documented cases of physical abuse by staff. While beatings are illegal, guards still use excessive force or other unsanctioned physical punishment, raising concerns about ongoing prison abuse. 18. Prison healthcare is so bad it's been called a death sentence. Inmates often wait weeks or months for critical care. In one shocking case, a man died of a tooth infection because he couldn't get antibiotics. Can you imagine dying from something so preventable? 19. Some prisons ban books outright. Titles like The New Jim Crow and Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria are deemed too controversial. Even educational books are sometimes prohibited. What are they so afraid of? 20. LGBTQ+ inmates face extreme violence and discrimination. Studies show they are far more likely to experience sexual assault and physical abuse in prison. Despite this, many are denied protective measures. How can this level of neglect still exist? 21. In some private U.S. prisons, inmates are charged fees for basic services like using the bathroom. While not universal, certain facilities impose small charges for things like toilet access, raising concerns about exploiting basic human needs for profit. 22. The U.S. incarcerates more women than any other country. Over 200,000 women are currently in prisons and jails, with many serving time for non-violent offenses. A majority are also primary caregivers, leaving thousands of children without parents. What happens to those kids? 23. Prisons are often understaffed, leading to dangerous conditions. Many prisons operate with minimal staff, leading to unsafe conditions for both inmates and guards. When the staff is spread thin, tensions rise, and violence can erupt. This jeopardizes everyone's safety. 24. Some states use prisoners to run call centers. Yes, inmates are answering phones for major corporations. They can't tell the callers they're incarcerated, and they earn pennies per hour while the companies save millions. This is exploitation of captive labor. 25. Suicide rates in prisons are alarmingly high. In some facilities, suicide is the leading cause of death. Solitary confinement, lack of mental health care, and hopelessness contribute to the crisis. Isn't prison supposed to rehabilitate, not break people completely? 26. Some inmates are denied basic hygiene products. In women's prisons, tampons and pads are often rationed or entirely unavailable. Many women are forced to improvise with unsanitary materials, leading to severe infections. How is this acceptable? 27. Prison gangs control much of the internal economy. From smuggling contraband to running protection rackets, gangs wield immense power. Inmates who refuse to join often face brutal retaliation. Imagine living under that constant threat. 28. Juveniles are regularly tried as adults. In some states, kids as young as 13 can be sent to adult prisons, where they are at extreme risk of abuse. Studies show they're 36 times more likely to be assaulted than adults. 29. Immigration detention centers mirror prisons. Over 30,000 people, including children, are held in these centers daily, often without proper legal representation. Many face inhumane conditions, including inadequate food, overcrowding, and abuse. 30. Private prison companies lobby for harsher sentencing laws. The more people they can lock up, the more money they make. These companies have spent millions lobbying for policies like mandatory minimums and 3-strike laws. 31. Prison guards sometimes smuggle in contraband. From cell phones to drugs, corrupt guards bring illegal items into prisons for money. In one notorious case, a guard in Maryland helped smuggle over $16,000 worth of contraband and was even romantically involved with an inmate. This level of corruption makes true reform seem almost impossible. 32. The U.S. spends $80 billion a year on prisons. That's more than the GDP of over 100 countries. Imagine if even a fraction of that money went to education, mental health services, or addiction treatment instead. Could this shift in priorities actually reduce crime, or is the prison system just too deeply entrenched? 33. Racial disparities in incarceration are staggering. Black Americans are incarcerated at 3 times the rate of white Americans. For example, in Wisconsin, 1 in 36 black adults is behind bars. How can we claim to have a fair justice system when these numbers highlight such glaring inequality? 34. Elderly inmates are the fastest-growing prison population. Some are over 80 years old, serving life sentences with no threat to society. States spend millions on medical care for aging inmates, many of whom need walkers or oxygen tanks. 35. The 3 strikes law often leads to life sentences for minor crimes. The law dictates that after 3 felony convictions, a person can be sentenced to life in prison, even if the 3rd offense is as minor as shoplifting. Does this seem like a just punishment for someone who has committed non-violent crimes? 36. There are more jails than colleges in the U.S. In some states, like Texas, there are more than twice as many jails as colleges. What does this say about a society that prioritizes incarceration over education? 37. Many prisons profit from inmate commissary sales. Items like soap, toothpaste, and snacks are sold at marked-up prices, forcing inmates' families to pay hundreds of dollars just to keep their loved ones comfortable. How can this system be considered fair when basic necessities are sold at a premium? 38. Prison riots are sometimes ignored by staff. In the infamous 2017 Lee Correctional Facility riot in South Carolina, guards waited over 4 hours to intervene. 7 inmates were killed in what was described as a bloodbath. 39. Some prisons use shock collars on inmates. These devices, strapped to prisoners during transportation or court appearances, deliver electric shocks if they misbehave. Critics call this a form of legalized torture. When did we stop caring about humane treatment in favor of control? 40. Many inmates are punished for speaking out. Whistleblowers who report abuse or corruption often face solitary confinement, loss of privileges, or even physical retaliation. How can we hope to improve the system when those who try to expose the truth are silenced? 41. Prison firefighting programs pay inmates less than $2 a day. In California, incarcerated individuals are trained to fight wildfires alongside professionals, but earn as little as $1 per hour. Even more shocking, most are barred from becoming firefighters after release due to their criminal records. A system rigged against second chances. 42. Inmates have to buy their own toilet paper in some prisons. That's right. If they run out, they must wait until they can afford more. For those without outside financial support, this basic necessity becomes a luxury. Imagine living like that. 43. Incarcerated parents often lose their parental rights. In some cases, if a child is placed in foster care for over 15 months, the state can permanently terminate the parent's rights, even if the incarceration was for a minor, non-violent crime. What happens to those families? 44. Prison labor produces goods for major U.S. brands. From furniture to license plates, inmates create products for pennies per hour. Some big corporations profit from this cheap labor, essentially turning prisons into modern-day sweatshops. Did you know about this hidden workforce? 45. Many inmates can't afford legal representation. Public defenders are often overworked and underfunded, leaving inmates with minimal defense in court. Shockingly, this can result in wrongful convictions or overly harsh sentences. 46. Prisoners with mental illnesses are often housed in solitary confinement. Over 200,000 mentally ill people are incarcerated in the U.S., and many are placed in solitary confinement, which exacerbates their conditions. 47. Some prisons keep inmates in chains during medical appointments. Even when they're sent to see doctors, inmates are sometimes shackled to the bed or kept in restraints the entire time. Just imagine trying to get medical help while being treated like an animal. 48. Prison phone calls are monitored and recorded. While some may argue it's for safety, others see it as a severe invasion of privacy. Even conversations with lawyers aren't always protected, raising serious legal concerns about the erosion of basic rights. This practice undermines the confidentiality that is crucial for a fair and just legal system. 49. Prison conditions contribute to a higher likelihood of reoffending. Studies show that the harsh, punitive nature of the prison system, rather than rehabilitation, leads many inmates to reoffend after release. 50. Many prisons are built in rural areas to boost local economies. While this might create jobs, it often leads to a lack of oversight and accountability. These remote locations make it harder for families to visit and for advocates to monitor conditions. 51. Many states allow prisoners to be used as test subjects for drugs. Inmates are sometimes required to participate in experimental medical trials for pharmaceutical companies. In exchange, they may receive small financial incentives or a reduction in their sentences. 52. Some prisoners are denied access to their legal documents. In many prisons, inmates don't have easy access to their case files or legal resources, making it nearly impossible to fight wrongful convictions or appeal their sentences. This lack of access creates significant barriers to justice, further entrenching the unfairness of the system. 53. Some prisons have a pay-to-play system for better conditions. Inmates who can afford to pay for special privileges like phone calls, access to better food, or even decent clothing often get a better quality of life behind bars. Is this how a justice system is supposed to work? 54. Nearly half of U.S. prisoners are held in private facilities. The private prison industry has exploded, with companies like GEO Group and CoreCivic controlling huge portions of the prison system. Their goal is profit, not rehabilitation. 55. Imagine this. 1 in 100 inmates in the U.S. is wrongfully convicted. These innocent people spend years, even decades, behind bars for crimes they didn't commit, all because of flawed evidence, false eyewitnesses, or outright misconduct. This stark reality highlights the deep flaws in the justice system, casting doubt on its ability to deliver true fairness. 56. Inmates are often given medications that make them drowsy and compliant. Many prisoners are put on heavy medications that dull their senses and make them more docile, sometimes for the convenience of prison staff. What's the cost of turning people into zombies just to maintain control? 57. Some inmates spend decades in prison for minor offenses. Many, especially those convicted of drug-related crimes, end up serving life sentences for non-violent acts. In some cases, their sentences are even longer than those for violent crimes. It's a clear sign that something is seriously wrong with the way justice is being served. 58. More than 100,000 people are incarcerated for violating parole. Instead of getting support, many individuals who are trying to reintegrate into society are sent back to prison for minor technical violations of parole, like missing a meeting or failing a drug test. 59. Many prisoners are locked in cells smaller than a parking space. Some cells in U.S. prisons are so small that inmates have little room to move. These tiny, cramped conditions are often referred to as sleeping closets. Can you even imagine living in a space that small for years? 60. Some prisons force inmates to stay in unheated cells during the winter. In some places, prisoners are left to endure freezing temperatures without heat, leading to frostbite and other cold-related illnesses. 61. Prison weddings are surprisingly common. Did you know that inmates can get married while serving time? Couples often hold small ceremonies inside the prison, and some facilities even allow brief private visits afterward. The fact that prison matrimony is a thing might surprise you. 62. Some states allow inmates to be sent to supermax prisons without a trial. Inmates can be placed in the most restrictive, inhumane conditions of supermax facilities based solely on a prison official's decision, without any due process. Just imagine living in a place where no one even has to justify keeping you there. 63. Some prisons have their own sports leagues. Inmates in certain facilities participate in organized sports leagues, including basketball, soccer, and even football. While this helps build camaraderie and provides exercise, it's strange to think about inmates forming their own competitive teams behind bars. 64. Inmates are often denied the right to vote. In most states, felons lose their voting rights for life. Over 6 million Americans are disenfranchised due to their criminal records, even after serving their time. This is far from what a true democracy should look like. 65. Inmates in some prisons create their own currencies. When cash is banned, prisoners come up with creative substitutes like trading stamps, ramen noodles, or even mackerel cans as currency. Yes, mackerel money is a real thing. 66. Prisoners with life sentences are often denied parole hearings. In many cases, individuals who have shown signs of rehabilitation are denied the chance to even appear before a parole board, meaning they may spend their entire life behind bars. How is this a fair system? 67. Kevin Smith was convicted in 1953 for murders he didn't commit and spent more than 6 decades behind bars. In 2021, after his case was reviewed, he was released. Imagine how it would feel to spend almost your entire life in prison for a crime you didn't commit, only to be released and realize that nearly your entire life has been taken away. 68. Some prisons sell products made by inmates on the open market. Companies like Victoria's Secret and JCPenney have been known to sell products made by inmates, including clothing and lingerie. Yet, the prisoners only receive a fraction of the profits. 69. Some prisons allow inmates to care for pets as part of rehabilitation. In these programs, prisoners look after dogs and cats, learning empathy and responsibility in the process. It might sound surprising, but these furry companions help inmates reconnect with their humanity and even prepare for life after release. 70. There was a jail in Arizona where inmates slept in tents, in the desert. At Tent City, in Maricopa County, inmates lived in large military-style tents with temperatures reaching up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 49 degrees Celsius. Conditions were so harsh that even guards refused to work there during the day due to the unbearable heat. The facility was shut down in 2017. 71. In the U.S., about 10,000 people are arrested every day, making the country's criminal justice system one of the busiest in the world. When you think about that number, it's hard not to imagine how much the system's resources are stretched. 72. Some prisons have time banks for good behavior. Inmates can earn time credits for participating in educational programs or maintaining good behavior. These credits can sometimes lead to earlier parole. It's like earning frequent flyer miles, but for freedom. 73. The number of elderly prisoners in the U.S. is growing rapidly, with the number of people aged 55 or older in prison doubling over the past 2 decades. As people age behind bars, they face increasingly difficult health problems, making their treatment and care a growing concern for the prison system. 74. The average prison sentence for Black Americans is 19% longer than for white Americans who commit the same crimes. This racial disparity in sentencing has been linked to systemic racism within the justice system. 75. Some prisons keep prisoners in death row isolation for decades. These individuals live in solitary confinement with no human interaction for up to 40 years and more. It's been shown that this level of isolation can have devastating psychological effects. 76. Many prisoners spend years in pretrial detention, even before being convicted. In the U.S., people who cannot afford bail often spend years in jail while awaiting trial, even though they are technically presumed innocent. Can you imagine being stuck in prison for something you haven't been convicted of? 77. Many female inmates are mothers, and their children are often placed in foster care, creating a devastating cycle of family separation. These mothers face an agonizing choice: maintain contact with their children from behind bars, or sever ties to protect them from the stigma of having an incarcerated parent. 78. Many prisoners experience inadequate or no mental health treatment. Mental health issues are rampant in prisons, but many inmates receive little to no treatment for their conditions. In fact, the prison system often becomes a dumping ground for people with untreated mental illnesses. 79. Some inmates brew their own prison wine, called Pruno. With nothing but rotten fruit, sugar, and a little ingenuity, inmates can whip up their own alcohol. It's dangerous, illegal, and absolutely disgusting, but somehow, it's a prison classic. 80. Prison gardens are surprisingly common. Picture this: inmates tending to rows of fresh vegetables and flowers. Gardening programs aren't just about growing food, they also help inmates learn patience and responsibility. Plus, who doesn't love a little sunshine? 81. Some inmates are forced to sign away their legal rights. Prisoners are sometimes pressured or coerced into signing documents that waive their right to sue the state or claim compensation for abuse. 82. Many prisoners don't have access to education or vocational training. While some facilities offer programs, the vast majority of inmates don't have opportunities to learn valuable skills that could help them reintegrate after release. How can we expect people to change if we don't give them the tools to do so? 83. Inmates are often used as cheap labor for the U.S. military. Some prisons have contracts with the Department of Defense, where prisoners work for military contractors assembling equipment, creating goods, or working in logistics, and they're paid less than minimum wage. 84. Many prisons have shockingly inadequate access to clean drinking water, forcing inmates to rely on contaminated or even toxic sources, which can lead to life-threatening diseases and chronic health problems. Clean water is a right, not a privilege, yet many prisoners are denied this basic necessity. 85. Inmates are sometimes charged for the cost of their own incarceration. In some states, prisoners are forced to pay for their room and board, often accumulating thousands of dollars in debt while they're incarcerated. How can people who are already serving time be expected to pay for it? 86. In certain prisons, inmates have been forced to become informants for law enforcement in exchange for more favorable treatment, leading to widespread distrust and betrayal among prisoners. Some even report being coerced into providing false information to avoid solitary confinement or other harsh punishments. 87. The prisoner who became a lawyer while incarcerated, Sean Hopwood, went to prison for bank robbery, but during his time behind bars, he studied law extensively. After serving just 11 years, he became a lawyer and later argued successfully before the U.S. Supreme Court, while still technically a convict. 88. Some prisons allow for-profit companies to charge inmates for food. Inmates in some private prisons are forced to buy food from the prison's commissary, and the prices are inflated, leaving them with little to no money for other essentials. 89. Prisoners can be charged for enhanced security measures. In some states, inmates are charged extra for being placed in solitary confinement or for having more restrictive conditions, even though they're already locked up. Is this not exploitation at its finest? 90. More than 50% of inmates in U.S. prisons have not completed high school. Education is one of the key factors that could reduce recidivism. Yet more than half of all inmates in the U.S. prison system have not completed their high school education. This leaves them without the skills and opportunities necessary to reintegrate successfully into society upon release. 91. Over the past few decades, the U.S. has experienced an explosive increase in its prison population, growing by 500% in the last 40 years. Ironically, despite the surge in incarceration, crime rates have not significantly dropped, sparking debates about the effectiveness of the system. 92. Many prisons have inadequate ventilation systems, leading to poor air quality and the spread of infectious diseases. These unhealthy conditions further compromise the well-being of incarcerated individuals. 93. In Maricopa County, Arizona, inmates were forced to wear pink underwear. At the infamous Tent City Jail, Sheriff Joe Arpaio made inmates wear pink underwear and socks, claiming it would reduce theft and humiliate them. Many viewed it as a form of cruel punishment, with critics arguing it was more about mockery than rehabilitation. 94. Prisoners are sometimes rented out for rodeos. The Angola prison rodeo in Louisiana is so wild that inmates are actually paid to perform dangerous stunts, like bull riding or catching a loose calf. It's like a real-life action movie starring prisoners. 95. Some inmates have to live in rat-infested cells. Conditions in certain prisons are so bad that inmates often live in cells infested with rats and other vermin, leading to poor hygiene and the spread of disease. Try to imagine being forced to live like this. 96. In some prisons, prisoners are deliberately issued shoes that are too big. This is done to reduce the risk of theft, violence, or escape attempts. Oversized shoes make it harder for inmates to use their footwear for anything other than walking, such as concealing weapons or tools, and help maintain security within the facility. 97. Former prisoners can be banned from public housing. After serving their time, many formerly incarcerated people are denied access to public housing, making it even harder for them to reintegrate and rebuild their lives. 98. A report found that 1 in 4 women in prison has experienced some form of sexual abuse prior to their incarceration. These figures highlight the deeply troubling connection between abuse, trauma, and involvement in the justice system. 99. Inmates can get in trouble for having too many books. Some prisons have a limit on how many books a prisoner can own at once. For many inmates, reading is one of the few ways to escape the harsh reality of prison life. But if they get too many books, they can be punished. 100. A prison in Florida charged inmates for outdoor time. At the Hernando County Jail, inmates were required to pay $5 for the privilege of spending time outside in a designated recreation area. If they couldn't afford the fee, they were denied access to fresh air. The practice was criticized as inhumane and was eventually ended after public backlash. 101. About 75% of incarcerated individuals will eventually be released back into society. But the real question is, how many of them will have the support they need to successfully reintegrate and avoid reoffending? So, which fact shocked you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I bet some of these blew your mind. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more jaw-dropping truths. See you in the next one.